Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 152.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Hello, this is Keith Parsons again with Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, and today I'm here with Ian. Ian, how do you pronounce your last name? Beyer or Beer?
Beyer, yes. Beyer.
Beer would be more fun for.
I tell people to spell it as beer with a Y in the middle.
That works. That works well. Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Where are you?
I am actually currently at home in Kansas for the moment. I was out doing site surveys yesterday in Dallas, and after that, I'm going to be taking a couple weeks to move.
Oh, there you go. So you hit on the wireless LAN professional scene in Austin back in 2014. That's like 4 years ago when you gave a presentation at WPC there, our first WPC in Austin, on kind of a unique Wi-Fi experience you had. You want to tell us a little bit about your Hollywood movie experience?
Sure, and I'll put a disclaimer on that I put that 10 talk together about 10 minutes before I went on. So it was a little hastily prepared, but it seemed interesting to the conference, so I figured I'd go up with it. This was back in about 2012 when they were working on production for the movie Nonstop, which was a Liam Neeson action flick. And I was contacted by a fellow who has probably the coolest job in New York in the film industry. If you're a geek, what he does is he builds blinky light sets for the film industry. If it's got video on it, if it's got blinky lights, if it's a server rack, he makes those, and he'll buy racks full of equipment and gut them and rewire them to make it look cool on TV. So he contacted me about this project where they were filming this scene inside of an airplane, and one of the things that happens is that there's news about what's going on in the airplane that comes over the in-flight entertainment system, and so they had to put all these video screens in the back of all the seats in the set, and this was being done. There was a product placement, and so what they ended up using were 7-inch tablets, and they needed to find a way to stream video to all these tablets at once so that it would look like everybody was seeing the same thing.
So basically, it looked like it was actually wired.
Right. And because they were Android tablets, it was not particularly easy to do that. You can't wire them in for power. You can't wire them in for data. You have to do it over Wi-Fi.
So what was your magic trick to make them happen?
Well, my magic trick, and I'm going to throw up another disclaimer in that I know a lot more now than I did then, and what I ended up doing ultimately didn't work nearly as well as I'd hoped it would, because I figured 3 Ubiquiti second generation access points were going to do it for some 75 tablets.
Why not? It's just 25 per AP.
Well,
who cares about airtime?
In order to make this work, they had to all be showing the same thing at the same time. And in order to do that, you have to do it with multicast. And that's when things get really tricky.
Yeah, Wi-Fi and multicast are one of those things when you hear it, you just kind of cringe.
Right. And this was the earlier Ubiquiti access points that really didn't do so well when they were under load. And averaging 15 or 20 clients on each of these APs was enough to cause them to fall over. And so that was not an ideal solution for the problem, but it was certainly my first foray into wireless design. And between that and the conference, that was kind of the beginning of my CW&E journey.
And how did it finish?
Well, it finished in that it sort of worked some of the time. They were able to at least use it to send a trigger to a custom app on these things that put a green screen up on each of the tablets when it was appropriate. There were a couple that they were able to stream to in some of the scenes that only had 1 or 2 of them, and they ended up doing the rest in post. Which there's the saying in the film biz, we'll fix it in post. Well, that was definitely the case that happened here.
Not a terribly easy thing to do, but that's why they get paid the big bucks there. Actually, my question was, how is the ending to your CWE journey?
Well, I was granted CWE number 273 about 2 months ago.
Yay, congratulations.
And I took my CWNA test at WLPC in 2017 and set for myself a goal of having my CWNE application in by the following WLPC, which I beat by a week.
That's so you got it from CWNA to CWNE in 1 year.
1 year and a bit. So there was a bit of a backlog because the CWNP folks were working on a whole bunch of things at the time. But
you did your part though. You got your part done.
I did my part within the year. Yeah.
So I mean, part of the CWNE is you have to have multiple years of work experience as well. So it's not like you could have started fresh with that 1 year plan, but that means you got all the exams, all the write-ups, all of the blog posts, everything done in a year. That's very well done.
Right. And I'd been blogging about wireless topics for probably close to 10 years, since long before I heard about the WLAN pros and CWNP and all that good stuff when some of these other guys with the single and double digit CWNE numbers were already, veterans at this. And, it was, I ended up in the Wi-Fi business kind of as an offshoot of the streaming stuff that I was doing as a consultant back in around 2011, 2012. And it was an industry that was becoming very quickly commoditized. And I saw the writing on the wall that if I didn't find myself a new skill to get really good at, that I was effectively going to be out of a job as a streaming consultant. And that's largely come true since the streaming.
I didn't even know that was a career.
Well, it was for a brief time there. And a lot of what I was working on was infrastructure. And a lot of what the consulting market is in that field now is custom code solutions. And I'm not a code guy. I code enough to be dangerous.
And I think that's more than enough. It's one of those things I think everyone in this industry is going to have to embrace more than we probably do already. I mean, some of us are doing a really good job of that. The rest of us need to kind of follow along. So you finished CWNE in a year worth of focused effort. What's next?
Well, next, I'm hoping to get a couple of maybe Cisco or Aruba certifications under my belt to make me more marketable in those fields. I'm actually in the process of transitioning to a new job where I'll be doing more wireless. I've been working for an MSP for the last year, doing some wireless, a lot of just miscellaneous IT infrastructure stuff. But I'll be doing more focus on Wi-Fi and getting good at that. And also hoping to be part of the Ekahau Masters program.
So have you applied?
I have.
So any answers yet?
Not yet. But I've got a couple of projects I've been working on that should be great for it.
Show up. Hey, look at me. I got really good stuff here. So get me into Masters. Good plan. So you also do some volunteer work, and it involves Wi-Fi and IT. You want to tell us a little bit about your volunteer efforts?
Well, sure. I volunteer with Team Rubicon as well as the IT Disaster Resource Center. My role with Team Rubicon is that I'm the regional technology manager in what is known in FEMA circles as Region 7, which is the area of Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri. And
both ITDRC and Team Rubicon use the same FEMA regions?
We do. And my role within that is that I'm the regional technology manager, and my job there is to make sure that our people out in the field have the technology tools they need to do what they do. And sometimes that involves working directly with ITDRC, especially on some of the bigger operations. So there's a synergy going on between those two organizations that's really cool.
So like Team Rubicon needs some technology and ITDRC provides it?
Right. And TR does have some of their own technology capability, but when we're dealing with a larger scale disaster, along the lines of what we saw last year with the hurricanes, both in Puerto Rico and in Texas, ITDRC has a lot more capability that they can bring to bear on a larger scale. And then sometimes on some operations, TR won't have the folks in the field that they need to do the tech stuff, and they'll contact ITDRC, who will then provide that for them.
So how much of your work with these volunteer organizations involves you going on site, or can you do it mostly remotely?
There's a little bit of both. Last year during the hurricane in Texas, I was down at the Team Rubicon National Operations Center in the Dallas area, working on getting technology logistics spun up for this. The hurricane was still going on when I was down there, and we had people going in and out doing boat rescues. And what we were trying to figure out is how do we provide the technical resources for the hundreds of volunteers that we're about to mobilize into this area, and how do we obtain those resources? Where are we going to get them? How are we going to get them there? What do we need? What are the conditions on the ground? How do we deal with things like wisps, so we don't interfere with them? There's just a whole host of interesting logistical problems that go on the back end without actually ever setting foot in the disaster area.
And did you also end up in Puerto Rico for part of that?
I did not. Unfortunately, I used up all the available time I had with my employer, my family, doing the logistics in Texas. I would have loved to go down to Puerto Rico. There's still operations going on down there for both organizations, and so maybe there's something else in the future for that, but not currently.
Would you? I mean, since you're involved with both, would you recommend this to others who might have some? They're new. They don't have a lot of experience. This is a good way to earn some experience by doing volunteer work.
Well, kind of yes and no. Volunteer work is good. However, in many cases, if you don't have the experience and need the experience, that's not necessarily the greatest place to get it. Sometimes we just need somebody who really knows what's going on, knows something really well. If you're in kind of a secondary assistant type role, then I think, it's a great place to learn. But if you're going out solo and don't have the experience, that could get a little bit challenging in the field.
Yeah, I kind of saw that as soon as I asked the question. I went, oh yeah, send someone out. Not a good time to learn when you have a lot of pressure on you.
Yeah, although for some of us, that's a great way to learn further and deepen your skill set. There's nothing like a deadline and that kind of pressure to get you to figure out what you need to.
Yeah, but when there's actual literal lives and families on the line, that might not be the best time to practice.
Right.
Good. You also have a lot of experience, and we met before at church IT roundtables. You've got a lot of experience in church. You want to tell us from a Wi-Fi standpoint, anything unique about the church environments that you've worked in? From a Wi-Fi standpoint?
Church environments are definitely an interesting environment for Wi-Fi because you've got kind of a combination of dense public venues in the auditoriums and sanctuaries, and then you've got your just regular enterprise office stuff. And one of the fun challenges that we run into is figuring out how to put these APs in these auditoriums. And you got a lot of churches that they believe the vendor hype when an AP says it'll support 500 users. And they'll just put one in the sanctuary. And then next thing you know, I'm getting a call going, hey, my Wi-Fi doesn't work in the sanctuary. Can you help me out?
It's okay. They have 2.4 gig video backhauls.
Right. And there are some interesting production equipment conflicts that arise as well. You've got companies like Teradek that make wireless video transmit and receive systems that operate in the 5 gigahertz band. You've got, and this is a particularly common one, you've got the audio engineer who's going to throw a little Apple Airport Express or a Linksys or something really cheap and low performing. They'll just throw that up, plug it into the soundboard so they can remotely control their digital soundboards using an iPad somewhere in the room without any consideration of any of the other RF that's in the room. And of course, these are the same guys that as soon as you step on their wireless microphones, they scream at you.
Well, it's their RF,
Right.
So anything else special other than, there's a lot of potential interferers from a design standpoint? How do you design differently for that compared to other kind of enterprises?
Well, what I've been recommending to a lot of these churches that I work with is that in the larger ones that they actually have somebody on staff who acts as a frequency coordinator. If there's any RF in the environment, whether that's the portable radio for the facilities and security team, whether that's wireless microphones, whether that's Wi-Fi or video transmitters, basically anything that's a transmitter, coordinate that with somebody. It doesn't have to be their full-time job, but there's got to be one point of coordination to do that, because otherwise everybody starts stepping on everybody and then nothing works and nobody's happy.
Kind of a RF czar.
Right. And there are some churches that are big enough that could be a full-time position.
Is there enough? A lot of big churches also have on-site daycare, classrooms, etc. Is there much interference, self-interfering between the sanctuary needs, the office needs, the school needs?
Well, one of the nice things about churches when dealing with it from a design and interference standpoint is that most of these buildings have been built in multiple phases over the years. So you run into a lot of exterior walls in the middle of the building, and you can get really creative with using those as attenuation to isolate various sections of the building.
I mean, it doesn't sound normal, but we really like thick walls.
It's. I'm actually working on a presentation for the Worship Facilities Expo this fall, where I'll be talking to church facility managers on how they can better design their buildings for good Wi-Fi and how they can design better Wi-Fi for their buildings. And I'll be talking about using that attenuation in a creative manner and designing the building such that the Wi-Fi can be more effectively installed. Because what typically happens in these cases is they'll spend years and years designing a building and raising the millions of dollars to build it. And then once they've laid the carpet 2 weeks before they open, they go to the IT department and go, oh, by the way, we need Wi-Fi in here and we're opening in 2 weeks.
You've actually done some of those.
Yeah, hypothetically, of course. Not that I would know anything about that.
Yes. Yeah. Not that you actually had to go through that experience.
Right.
Like let's pull cable after everything's installed.
Right.
Well, I appreciate your time today. Is there any parting words you want to give to our audience about your process and how you might, give advice to anyone else who's along this path?
Well, my path towards the CWNE was a little unorthodox, and the first training class I actually took was the CWDP with Tom Carpenter, because at that point in my professional life, the design skills were what I needed the most, and so that's what I started with, and I didn't take the CWNA until 2 years later. And then I went back and revisited the DP, and then I also ended up doing CWSP, CWAP on the same day. I took those tests back to back because I found in the process of studying for them that there was a lot of complementary material between them. So I learned both of those in parallel, and so it made sense to actually take the test at the same time as well, because all that information was fresh, and each test related to the other one, and it worked out really well for me.
Sounds good. Well, I wish you luck in your new endeavor. Keep us informed. And when you finish up your presentation on how to design, we'd love to come back and talk about that and share that with the audience about, I would love to be able to have something to go talk to architects across the board, not just worship architects, but all architects, and let them in on a couple of the secrets on how they can help their own Wi-Fi by using their skills and our skills together.
Absolutely. And of course, like everything else, I plan to blog about that. So
sounds good. Well, good luck with your endeavors.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Mentor Minute.
Well, Keith, we've been getting questions, things that people are struggling as wireless LAN professionals. This question has come in. How do I convince customers of the value of site surveys?
Oh, wonderful question. And the problem with the question is when they say site survey, sometimes they mean a predictive design, but they call it a site survey. Sometimes they mean a validation survey to prove whether or not it met. Sometimes they mean an AP on a stick survey when you're going to use it as a design tool. Or sometimes you mean an AP on a stick when you're doing a validation of a design pre-install. So lots of different ways to attach that word. So let's just start at the beginning in the process. The first process is you need to clearly define the requirements. It is probably in my consulting practice, the thing that takes the most amount of time in design. At least 50%, maybe 75% of the time is spent solidifying, agreeing to, and finding the exact requirements that the customer needs and getting them to agree on it. Once we have the requirements, the actual design process is fairly fast. So the first step after having design, I do a predictive design I happen to today use Ekau ESS to design and redesign. And I say redesign design is actually an iterative process. You go through the requirements, and maybe they need coverage everywhere. So you first design for coverage. Then they need a voice grade Wi-Fi with secondary coverage. Then you add secondary coverage. Then you have to make sure that you have no co-channel interference, because capacity is driven by air times, not number of APs. So we have to make sure we're not getting co-channel interference. And that's another design cycle. And as you loop through those cycles, it's an iterative. You go further and further. And at some point, you end up with a design that has AP placement, height, power, channels, whatever. And if you're not feeling really confident, and depending on how many times you've gone through this process, you might want to, at that point, do an AP on a stick survey to validate your predictive. Because it's a lot cheaper at this point to validate an AP that Eckhouse said, put it here, it'll go this far. So go ahead and take an AP, put it there, and match it and see whether or not your predictive matched reality. And if it didn't, now is a good time before you do an install to make sure you tweak that. And it's just one more cycle in the iterative process. If you're really super, super not confident at all, you might want to do 100%. Every single AP location that Eckhouse says, you go on site and you do an AP on a stick to prove it. After a while, you've been doing these over and over, maybe that percentage drops 180, 40, 20, depending on how many times you've done the same type and you're feeling really confident that you've seen in the past, when I put an AP here, it acted this way. I maybe get down to a 10% AP on a stick validation. Some sites that have heavy reflections, since most predictive software today doesn't do reflections, only attenuation, you might want to up that validation percentage of how many AP on a sticks. Then there's an install process. Post-install, we have a validation survey, and a validation survey is to prove, did what the predictives say actually happen in the real world? And a validation survey is one of those that you must have. I tell people you may want to go on site. In fact, I think you should go on site to do all your predictives so you can get all information while you're still there. But you must do a post-install validation survey. And so the question that was just a setup to answer the question.
Yeah.
The question was, how do you convince the customer? And I like to talk to the customers about, and systems integrators we speak with, who pays for a validation survey. I'm using a Wi-Fi term, but we'll apply it to cable. So when you hire a cable contractor to come in and pull Cat6 cable, who pays for that cable contractor to validate every punch down, every patch cord to make sure that it meets Cat6 spec? Well, normally in most situations in the US, in our culture, the cost of doing validation is borne by the people doing the install. So if a cable contractor gets paid for doing an install, they don't get paid until they turn over their validation results proving every cable was pulled properly. And if it wasn't, they will, while they're on site, fix it while they're right there. In Wi-Fi, because of how we got here, it's a crazy world of how we ended up in this place. Some people want to charge for the design up front. Totally agree, because every building I've ever been in, they paid an architect to do the design. Yeah. So for customers who are balking or wondering, should I pay for the upfront design? If you call it like a predictive survey, that just sounds, well, one, it sounds terrible because you're not predicting and you're not surveying, you're not doing either. But if you want to say, well, I'm going to charge you for the design, it's an engineering process. Sound engineers, structural engineers, electrical engineers, architects, they all charge for design. So that's a very simple one to explain that way. The AP on a stick validation little side loop, that's more you trying to figure out, I want to up my confidence level. Now, some vendors, some ISVs are out there and they sell validate AP on a sticks as part of their process. And if they can sell it and the customer buys it, I'm all for it. The post-install validation survey, that validation, is it exactly what we wanted, I think is a requirement. You have to do it, or you never have a feedback loop to see if you're making any mistakes. But that's a really tough one to sell to your customer, to say, I want you to pay me to prove whether or not I did my job right.
Yeah.
Then that's usually that's kind of on the onus there. So depending on your organization and how you get paid, some organizations bundle they charge for the predictive and the validation AP on a stick, and they don't charge for the validation. They include it in the cost of the gear. Some charge for all three, some charge for none. It's kind of what you can get away with. And where is it itemized out? So if most customers I've seen are used to having the cable contractor pay for their own validation, so usually we have the installers pay for their own validation. It is a hard cost, and it just needs to be built into your system. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, it sounds like just technique when dealing with any kind of sales situation is connecting it to something that customer understands. Like, here's an example where this most closely relates to, and then hopefully the light bulb can go off for them, like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So maybe some of it's just,
And I think it's using the right words.
yeah,
You call something a word or a name that they don't understand, like predictive survey, it just sounds weak.
yeah.
When it's an engineering design process, it sounds like something they expect to pay for.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks, Keith. And again, guys, if you've got questions, please submit them via Twitter or online. We'd love to answer the questions that you're facing. Thank you. Thanks, Keith.
10 Talks.
Good day, everyone. Wow, this crowd's getting bigger. That's pretty good stuff. My name is Mike Leibovitz, also go by Mike Leib. I work in the CTO office for Extreme Networks. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. A couple of reasons. One, that's where I was born. And two, that's where my company has our Wi-Fi engineering facility. So I get to spend a lot of time in the United States. Today, for some reason, I've only been speaking to Canadians, which has been really interesting, and all by fluke, including somebody I'm sitting beside who lives 2 streets over from me. So that's kind of a pretty random thing to happen. Extreme Networks, we had the opportunity to participate at Super Bowl in 3 different ways. One, we provided analytics at the game inside of Levi Stadium. 2, we provided Wi-Fi coaches, which is actually a league-wide program that we started to help kind of as a courtesy for the fans to get on Wi-Fi and understand how to use Wi-Fi and or the apps. And number 3, we participated at Super Bowl City. And Super Bowl City was an idea that the host committee for the Super Bowl wanted to really create an area in downtown San Francisco specific to celebrate the 50th game, right? The 50th year of Super Bowl. And so the host committee asked Extreme Networks to come and put in a temporary network inside of the Embarcadero Market Street area. Has anyone deployed a temporary Wi-Fi network? Has anyone deployed a temporary Wi-Fi network inside of a major city? Pretty good advice is don't do it. It's certainly not the easiest thing to do, and obviously inside of a major city area, you are contending with everything in terms of other businesses, other Wi-Fi networks, and of course, service providers that happen to provide their own Wi-Fi network environment as well. A quick overview, essentially what the host committee did. Again, they peeled out some of the Embarcadero area. They set up a really big area with stages and all sorts of interactive fan experience things. Again, you know, the game at Levi Stadium was out in San Jose. Most of the tourists and people that were coming, they wanted to have an experience inside of the city. It was somewhat unique compared to previous Super Bowls, where typically the fan areas are in and around the stadium. So this was downtown in the city area. So deploying in the city, I was trying to get some better pictures, but suffice to say, it's not an easy thing to do, right? When you start talking about conduits and running cable, particularly to have a network operating for 1 week, you're going to do this above city streets. You're going to do this as carefully and elegantly as you can, but it's not very simple. David Coleman was talking earlier. Layer 1. Layer 1 breaks networks fantastically. When you put in temporary cables and you are terminating those cables, you certainly better test them, and you probably want to test them more than once. It's quite an amazing thing how quickly a wireless network will break when the wired backhaul is not working. So, you know, running cables across the city streets, not very easy, right? Certainly things that you need to take into consideration to get that done in a timely manner. Wired networks. So, you know, at Extreme Networks, we provide both wired and wireless technology. So we have the luxury of putting in the wired back end of the infrastructure as well. A couple of interesting things when I saw this picture. It was kind of funny to me. One of these IDFs, that, you know, again, a temporary IDF, actually has a little bit of rain on top of it, which I think no one really expected. Need another microphone here. A little bit of rain, and obviously, as probably many of you see, there's quite a bit of garbage sitting underneath that box as well. One of the things that was actually kind of cool about the way that the wired network was built, so 10 gig interconnects between the switches themselves, running in a layer 2 loop. So we actually managed to convince the cabling guys to actually loop the entire city area that we got to participate in. We're using a standards ERPS, Ethernet ring switching protection protocol. The funny story there was that we didn't actually have the last leg completed when the network got turned on. Our guys continually asked, it took us about 24 hours to convince them that we did need to complete the loop. They said, hey, everything's working, don't touch it, leave it alone. We said, no, let's make sure that the loop is completed. And then redundant multi-provider, 1 gig internet feeds, so 2 different service providers and a couple of mechanisms to load balance out those internet feeds. So from a wireless perspective, again, temporary, right? You're putting things in, you're putting them on poles. You're doing this pretty much without any sort of design. So I know a whole bunch of you are going to look and say, oh my God, here we are talking about not designing Wi-Fi. Well, there's no way to design this. You pretty much need to spray and pray your RF and tweak it and tune it, right? So you're doing this on the fly. We chose to use 55-degree antennas. You can see it up there on the pole with an outdoor access point. So it was continually measured, tuned, optimized, but really this is just a positioning exercise, right? This is moving an antenna and using your eyes and kind of your common sense as to where it's going to go. Probably not surprisingly, we deployed 5 gigahertz only. We played around a little bit with 2.4. 2.4 is not going to work inside of a city, particularly, again, where you have other wireless LANs and service providers that are providing Wi-Fi as well. So what did it look like? And I pulled some stats off our analytics system. Monday through Sunday, what did the activity actually look like? We saw over 64,000 unique Wi-Fi sessions. I should back up to say that the last point on my slide there, single SSID, no portals, no authentication, no advertising. So nobody actually knew that this network was there, which is very interesting in terms of the take rate, right? How do people actually know that there's a Wi-Fi network? They have to look at it on their phone. So 64,000 unique Wi-Fi sessions through the week, which is pretty good for an unadvertised 5 gigahertz only Wi-Fi network. We peaked about 4,000 clients on the wireless network Friday evening. So the game was Sunday, for those that aren't familiar. So Monday all the way through Sunday, we were collecting these stats. But Friday night was probably the biggest party that was going on. So about 4,000 peak clients. We moved about 3.5 terabytes of data through the week. Everyone seems to be really enthralled by counting terabytes these days. It's not actually my preferred analytic metric to look at in terms of quality, but it's something that people can understand quite readily in terms of how much data was moved. This one I thought was pretty interesting. 59% of the client devices, so this is an average through the week, were capable of 11 AC. So close to 60% of the devices that we saw that associated were capable of 11 AC. So certainly clients are coming along and becoming more capable. As the week progressed, the peak time shifted as well, right? So from a temporary Wi-Fi network, when you think about when people are going to use it, why they're going to use it, the peak time shifted from kind of the afternoon, late afternoon into the evening. So as the week progressed, more and more people were gathering into the night. Again, and just an interesting way to look at it and think about how your wireless LAN is working. And this one, which I showed it to one of my colleagues, and he said that should be 100%. But this is a really interesting point, actually, and David was speaking about it earlier as well. But somewhere between 98 to 99% of clients are actively using DNS all the time. When you talk about Wi-Fi not working or slow Wi-Fi, when your DNS isn't working very well, it's going to break your Wi-Fi or at least give the perception that Wi-Fi is not working very well. Clearly the number one protocol. So I think it's an interesting stat to pull out of the analytics and share it with all of you in terms of thinking about how to design and deploy your wireless networks. So here's the one that, there could be some controversy, but I'll try to explain what I did. And it's kind of difficult to pull a single event over a few hours and compare it to something that occurred over a week, right? And so I tried to do that, and this is more a perspective thing. I think people will kind of be interested in some of the stuff I show up now. What I'm essentially categorizing here are the top 10 applications that were used during Super Bowl I categorize that by how much bandwidth they consumed, and I'll explain why in a second. And then I'm showing the percentage of fans that are using it. So the number one application that was being used, and I did this in reverse order. I'm not David Letterman, so I could have started at 10, but I'm going to start at number 1 anyways. The first application in terms of bandwidth that was consumed is iCloud. That may surprise some people. That may not surprise people. So during the event at Super Bowl, about 70% of the fans the devices were using iCloud, but 56% on average during the week at Super Bowl City. Number 2. iOS updates. So you had somewhere between close to 30% of the devices at Super Bowl using iOS updates. About 17% averaged over the week at Super Bowl City. Now this one. No, nothing local. So it's all got to go out to the internet. It's all got to go out. The next 3 are really interesting, but I can't talk about them for certain reasons. I've been muzzled on those ones, so we'll continue. We'll keep moving on. I put them in for the sake of consistency. The next ones probably won't surprise you very much, but Facebook comes up as the number 6. 50 to 60% of people are going to be using Facebook almost everywhere you go. The other social networks, they reign pretty well as well, right? They're certainly used very, very heavily in the Super Bowl. I thought the Twitter one was kind of interesting. Super Bowl game, over 22% of fans were using Twitter, only about 9% during the week at Super Bowl City. I'm not sure where or why that is, but hey, that's what the numbers said. And the last one I'm also not allowed to talk about, but if you find me at lunch or if you buy me a beer, maybe I'll speak about it. Now here's where things kind of get interesting, and I'll convert back to the other format of what I was calculating or looking at. So when I took the 2 top applications by bandwidth, iCloud and iOS updates, about 35% of the consumed bandwidth, so I spoke about 3.5 terabytes of data, about 35% of that was just on those 2 applications alone. And the really interesting one is that at Super Bowl, the game itself, about 50% of the bandwidth. So a lot of you have heard, and this is pretty easy math, I'm not a mathematician, but you've heard the 10 terabyte number. I'm saying that about 50% of that was used by 2 applications. That gives you a pretty good indication of what the majority of that network was doing. And certainly, I take I tip my hat to the team at Aruba and Chuck. Certainly the network performed quite well at Levi under a lot of pressure. So one other stat, this number just completely blew my mind, and so I had to share it. Last year I kind of made a joke at Super Bowl 48, how many Blackberries were in the crowd. We profiled exactly 4 Blackberries. Now here's where things get really interesting. Super Bowl 49 and Super Bowl 50, you're talking, let's just round it up to about 50,000 devices over those 2 games that unique the Wi-Fi. So what was the growth rate? Anyone want to take a guess?
6, 100%.
Pretty good guesses. This completely blew my mind, and it was the first stat, the first thing I looked at Super Bowl 50. 4 Blackberries. So the question then becomes, who are these 4 Canadians that went to both games? And I got it figured out. I took all the MAC addresses, I compiled them, and magically and contextually relevant to Phoenix, we found 4 Canadians, those being Steve Nash, certainly Wayne Gretzky, Drake, who apparently performed here at some point, and of course, a little bit of a stretch, but he's on his way to Aspen, my good friend there, Jim Carrey. Interesting stat, completely blows me away. So overall, Super Bowl City was certainly a great thing for Extreme to get to participate in. It was overall quite successful. I think the fans had a great experience, and that's really what it's all about, right? That's why the NFL is doing what they do in terms of why they put digital technologies in the hands of their fans, and if and when they want to go and build bigger from it. So with that, I conclude a little bit over time. I apologize.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.